His Excellency Oliver Grimson, President of Iceland. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. I would like to begin by thanking President Grimson for inviting Singapore to the second edition of the Arctic Circle Assembly. It is also an additional honor for Singapore to share the stage, in a manner of speaking, with the President of Finland, the Prime Minister of Iceland, and also Chancellor of Germany. I would also like to congratulate the Icelandic government for the excellent arrangements and also for the impressive turnout in this year's assembly. In such a short time, the Arctic Circle Assembly has established itself as an important platform for inclusive, open, and constructive dialogue on the Arctic region. Last year, as some of you may remember, I spoke about the reasons why Singapore, a city-state just 1 degree north of equator, is showing such a close interest in the high north. During last year's assembly, I also sketched out some ways in which I thought that Singapore could make a modest but practical contribution to the Arctic. And Singapore's contribution can be sketched out in 4 areas: environmental protection, development of a safe Arctic region, sustainable economic development, and development of human capital. The last 12 months have been a very steep but enriching learning curve for Singapore. I have seen a little bit more of the Arctic, and I also met many knowledgeable people who know the Arctic well and care deeply for the region. So my visits and conversations have left me more convinced than ever of how precious the Arctic is in all senses of the word, but also how fragile. We have learned much, thanks to the generosity of our friends and partners, many of whom are here in this assembly today. So we understand a little bit better now on how Singapore can contribute to the development objectives of the Arctic forums like the Arctic Council and the Arctic Circle. But there is still much more to learn. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, changes in the Arctic continue to gather momentum. It is instructive, for instance, that in the summer of 2013, 71 vessels sailed the route between the Bering Strait and the Barents Seas. This was a 54% increase from 2012, when 46 vessels sailed the Northern Sea route. When we compare to just 4 vessels sailing the route in 2010, I think the change is even more dramatic and remarkable. Prospects of a further expansion of shipping and other maritime activities in the coming years render more urgent efforts to establish an international rules-based framework for Arctic shipping that is consistent with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Singapore therefore supports the early conclusions of the Polar Code currently being developed in the International Maritime Organization. We are also happy to note that the steady progress on the Polar Code and will work with others to see through the conclusion of the code early. Ladies and gentlemen, the need to develop effective responses to emergencies such as oil spill in Arctic waters is also greater than ever. We can pool our experiences and increase knowledge on shipping safety issues. At a working group level in the Arctic Council, the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore has shared Singapore's experiences in oil spill management based on Singapore's experience in responding to and cleaning up an oil spill from the collision of 2 crude oil tankers in the Straits of Singapore in 1997. The pooling of expertise can also drive the development of constructive solutions in the field of emergency preparedness in the Arctic, including through technology. So Singapore is presently collaborating with Norway to develop and test marine versions of an unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, for the monitoring of oil spills and other marine incidents. The UAV will be able to move at a speed of 5 to 10 meters per second and provide an aerial picture of oil spill incidents that can be magnified tenfold. It is not only in matters of technical expertise that non-Arctic states like Singapore have a role to play. Awareness on the changing Arctic needs to go beyond the region. After all, those changes have global implications. Last year, I gave several examples of how changes in the Arctic have wide-ranging ramifications for our environmental security and our maritime interests. Singapore is therefore happy to have taken steps to bring the unique nature and culture of the Arctic a little closer to Singapore in recent months. Last April, we were privileged to host a visit by the Canadian Inuit storyteller, Mr. Michael Kusugat, and his wife, Geraldine. Through the enthralling and interactive stories, Singaporeans of all ages learn about the age-old Inuit traditions. Michael and Geraldine also share with us what it is like to live in the Arctic of the 21st century, enjoying modern housing and education, but also relying on their age-old, rich traditional culture, heritage, and knowledge. In June this year, the Singapore National Youth Achievement Award Council and HSBC sponsored 4 young Singaporeans on a trip to Churchill, Canada, to study the effect of climate change at the Arctic's edge with researchers from the Churchill Northern Studies Center. During the 10-day expedition, these young Singaporeans studied saplings to find out how climate change had affected the area's trees. They even have to deal with the remnants of a summer snowstorm that occurred just before they arrived. I hope that their experiences will inspire more Singaporeans to venture into the Arctic. Indeed, if you may be surprised to know that one can find Singaporeans living in faraway corners of the Arctic. When I visited White Horse in Yukon, Canada last month, I was surprised to find a mini Singaporean community living in White Horse. And in Akureyri, Iceland, 2 years ago, I met a Singaporean who was cooking up a storm in his own restaurant, serving the local people. So the presence of all these small Singapore communities in the Arctic is perhaps a sign of increasing interconnectedness between the equatorial Singapore and the Arctic. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Singapore might have started out as an unfamiliar face in the Arctic. I hope that you are now a little bit more better acquainted with us in the last 1 to 2 years. Singapore does not have a direct stake in the Arctic and its rich natural resources, but we have a stake in supporting responsible development and good governance of the region. Arctic states have adopted an enlightened approach towards regional cooperation. The Arctic Council is a good model of political consensus building and functional cooperation, including at the scientific level. The fact that the Arctic indigenous communities, or the permanent participants in the Council, have been given full consultative status in the Council is also uncommon among regional organizations and architectures. There are also other regional and sub-regional platforms for discussions of Arctic issues, including this very forum. They might have some overlapping involvement and agenda. This situation reminds me very much of the approach that we have taken in Southeast Asia and the broader Asia-Pacific region. We called it variable geometry in regional cooperation, and also a constructive duplication. It may give rise to some duplication and competition from time to time, but given the complexity of the challenges in the Arctic, the existence of these different forums with different configurations will be useful. They foster dialogue, forge better mutual understandings, and generate initiatives for collaboration. This benefits the region as a whole over a longer term period. Moving forward, Singapore is looking forward at creating opportunities for stakeholders of the Arctic to come to Singapore to broaden and deepen the dialogue that we have begun. We have thought of two different ways. First, we have started programs to facilitate people-to-people exchanges between Singapore and the Arctic indigenous communities. We offer scholarships for short professional enrichment courses conducted under the Singapore Cooperation Program on relevant aspects of policy and public administration, such as port management, public health, and human capital development. We also offer a postgraduate scholarship for the Masters of Law Maritime Law program at the National University of Singapore. The curriculum of this 1 year's master's program includes the law on commercial shipping, marine insurance, shipping regulation, and ocean policy. Over and above these scholarships, we also organize study visits for representatives of the 6 circumpolar organizations representing the various indigenous communities in the Arctic. These communities face the challenge of adapting to and managing change while preserving their innate and fundamental cultural strengths forged over many generations, over many centuries. We believe that there is much that we can learn from their law and traditions, including in contextualizing responsible development strategies in the Arctic, and we look forward to welcoming these representatives to Singapore for a study visit next month. Second, we also would like to work further with Arctic states and stakeholder organizations to bring high-level discourse on Arctic issues to Singapore. Singapore is already working with Norway and Canada to mount a few thought-provoking exhibitions and events to inspire conversations about the Arctic. And we have lined up 1 or 2 more such exhibitions in 2015, which incidentally is also a milestone year for Singapore as we mark the 50th anniversary of Singapore's independence since 1965. To cap these events, in November 2015, I'm pleased that the 3rd edition of the Sustainable Ocean Summit will be held in Singapore. I'm also pleased that in conjunction with the Singapore Summit, the Arctic Circle will also hold a one-day seminar in Singapore, as announced by President Grimson just now. This forum will be a fulfillment of the visions of President Grimson's thought when he conceived the idea of Arctic circles. He thought it important to spread the Arctic gospel, or you may call it Alleluia, far and wide. And in Singapore is very happy to offer a staging point for that mission. I therefore hope to welcome you all in Singapore next year. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have every confidence that the 2nd Arctic Circle Assembly will add much to the international dialogue on the Arctic. I'm also very sure that it will sow the seeds of meaningful partnership and mutually beneficial collaborations that will serve our common interests in the Arctic. Together, I think we can make Arctic a better, safer home for the globe. Thank you very much.